Hello everybody and welcome back to another online Chinese history class with me, Tony. In the last class we talked about the fourth and fifth of the five hegemons of the spring and autumn period, Qin Mu Gong and Chu Zhuangwang, and how they became hegemons and what they did as hegemons. So after the spring and autumn period, where there were many kingdoms and the strongest were usually the hegemons, except for one exception, Song Xianggong. We now move on to the Warring States period. This period is still within the Eastern Zhou dynasty, as the dynasty is split between two different periods, which is the spring and autumn period and the Warring States period, which we're gonna talk about now. So what do you think caused this to happen? What do you think caused spring and autumn period to transition and then become the Warring States period and separate the Eastern Zhou dynasty into two periods? I'll give you a bunch of choices. A. Many smaller kingdoms grew weaker and they were conquered by other kingdoms until there were only a few strong kingdoms left, and those were known as the Warring States. Or B. Many smaller kingdoms grew weaker and were conquered by stronger kingdoms. Jin, one of the strongest kingdoms at that time, also split into three, and this was the point that initiated the start of the Warring States period. Without this, it would have taken longer to transition into the Warring States period. C. The smaller kingdoms grew afraid of bigger ones that had more power, so a lot of them formed groups and alliances, but they were more than alliances. They basically merged into a couple of bigger and stronger kingdoms, and this technically made it so that there were less kingdoms. So now there's Warring States. It's a very common theme that there's less kingdoms. So D. A very powerful kingdom expanded so much that it conquered all of the powerful kingdoms except for a few. Those few powerful kingdoms formed to make one kingdom, while all of the rest of the smaller and weaker kingdoms were like, oh no, we're about to get absolutely dominated if we don't do something, which is why they decided to form a kingdom themselves, and that included all of the weaker kingdoms. So the Warring States in this answer choice became a three-way battlefield. I'll give you some time to think and answer this question. Alright, so time is up, and the correct answer was B. The smaller kingdoms grew weaker, and the strong kingdoms saw this opportunity to expand their territory and increase their power. They conquered the weaker kingdoms, and slowly but surely the numbers of kingdoms decreased. Sometimes it was fast, since the stronger kingdoms moved with extremely fast speed and grace, and their troops were just too strong, and the numbers of kingdoms basically decreased. And Jin, one of the strongest kingdoms at that time, it was the kingdom of the third hegemon that resided. The third hegemon was from there, and then he resided there. So this kingdom, the Jin kingdom, split into three because of a lot of internal conflict. There was a war going on and a lot of things going on, and when they separated out, they didn't immediately wage war on each other. However, they weren't exactly on positive terms either, which is why they separated. So yeah, so many historians believe that this was what initiated the start of the Warring States period. Without this would have been delayed until a couple decades later, or a couple decades later, maybe even a whole century, or maybe it wouldn't have happened at all. That's what most historians believe. So right before we get into the details of the Warring States period, do you know why the spring and autumn period was called what it was called, the spring and autumn? It's not because the wars were, it was only taking place in the spring and autumn seasons, where there was only 2 seasons, which is the spring and autumn. No, that's not what it is. But it was named after a famous book named Spring and Autumn by Confucius. It was written by Confucius. Most of you probably already know who he is. I mean, he is one of the most famous Chinese philosophers of all time, and one of the most famous historians too. He wrote a bunch of books that gave us information about history, especially this one, the Spring and Autumn period, which gave us all the information that we needed for the spring and autumn, the history of it. So, the book, detailed major and also minor details, like normal people's lives and things like that, because he wasn't exactly a king, he wasn't exactly, he wasn't up very high in royal authority or positions. So we got to see from his point of view what was happening and going on. So yeah, Confucius had around 3,000 students learning his philosophy. So he was considered the paragon of Chinese sages. Now that's a word I've mentioned in a couple classes back. Paragon. It's something that is the best representation of the thing that's describing. So Confucius is the best example of a Chinese sage, a philosopher. No. So on to the Warring States period. After the smaller kingdoms got conquered and basically eaten up by bigger kingdoms, basically small fish by big fish. That's a very common analogy. And it's split into 3. There was only 7 kingdoms left: Han, Zhao, Wei, Qi, Chu, Yan, and Qin. The 3 kingdoms that resulted from the dividing of Jin were Han, Zhao, and Wei. These 7 kingdoms were the Warring States of the Warring States period. They were the Warring States. That's why it's called the Warring States period. And the wars in this period were horrifying. Well, of course, you would know that this period focused on war, since it's in its name, warring. So yeah, that's half of the entire period's name. So of course there would be war. They were much more brutal than the ones in the spring autumn period. They were much more disgusting. They were much more blood, much more killing. Yeah. The difference between the battles in this period and the last spring autumn period is that there was a new system for most kingdoms to calculate the ranks of soldiers. The more enemies a soldier eliminated, the more they would be respected, the higher they would be held in regard. It's basically a video game at this point. They will receive more rewards like property, including mansions and tons of acres of land, and this encouraged the soldiers to risk their lives more and made the battlefields just basically entirely red, just a literal bloodbath. So just like back in the good old spring and autumn period days, there was a bunch of corpses lying everywhere, arrows lying on the ground. But if the enemy ran away, if the enemy retreated, you wouldn't particularly chase them down and slaughter them, because there was no point to you already showed off your power, which is what was needed, to gain more influence and hopefully become a hegemon. But here's the thing: the entire point of honor was barely even looked at, and helping other kingdoms was just a rare occasion at all. And this was because nobody had interest in becoming a hegemon anymore, because it was basically worthless to become a hegemon. There was so little kingdoms. There was only 7, so that becoming hegemon wouldn't really do anything, because all the other kingdoms know who you are. Becoming hegemon was that other kingdoms know who you are, so you would have more power over them. But now all the kingdoms know who you are, what your power is, how much power you have, how much influence you have, so it's not really that useful. So technology also advanced in this period, and new war strategies was also formed. New armor was made, new types of things, new types of cavalry, things like that. These developed because more wars happened, and people wanted more efficient ways to conquer more land, slaughter more enemies, and obtain more power. So that's going to be it for today. See you next time.